This is the U.S. Army M9 bayonet. And bayonets like this are made for cutting up and putting holes into things, like people. They're also made for other things, like combat and utility tasks, and survival. But the question is, are they actually good for use as survival knives? To answer that question, we're going to take 3 U.S. military bayonets and 2 purpose-built survival bushcraft type knives and put them through 4 different tests. At the end of each test, we'll give them a score from 0 to 5 and see just how good they are.
Head on down to VentureSurplus.com. We got all your favorite gear to get outside, and you'll get 10% off your next purchase with coupon code FIXBAYONETS.
All right, first test we're gonna do with feathering is with the M7 bayonet. So let's see how it does. All right, not too bad. Everything's a little thicker than I'd like it to be for, a good feathering, but I think we're gonna have that issue with all of these bayonets and knives, honestly, just because it's a pretty thick blade. So let's move to the next one. All right, next one, M9 bayonet. Let's find a good peak. All right, so that's that one. As you can see, I kind of moved spots to try and give it a better shot. Definitely thicker than the M7, just as a thick old knife blade right there. But it does the trick. Would you be able to use this to light a fire? Probably, but it's just a little thicker than I'd like again. So next one. All right, we're on to the USMC M7 bayonet, or USMC 3S bayonet. All right, a little thinner. Blade profile up there is a little thinner, so it got me a little good. But I will say it was a little harder because if you see on the 3S, we have serrations right here and then the edge itself. So I had to start a little further out. Whereas when you're feathering, you want to be a little more in for that control, but still did the trick. About as good as the M7 did. So next one. And the next one is the Tops Moccasin Ranger. All right, this one did pretty good. A lot thinner than the bayonets were, even though that blade is still about as thick or thicker in a lot of areas. But I was able to get good control because I do have that notch right here. So I was able to get real down in there as I'm easing my blade in. But overall, feathering pretty good with the tops. So let's go to the next one. And that is the Amazon Special. Let's see how she does. Okay, not too bad. A little thicker than the tops, around the same thickness as the M7 did, so in the middle of those two. But overall pretty good. That blade does come back pretty far, so able to get decent control, even though it has a big old hand guard. All right, to score all these knives as far as how they do on feathering, score of 1, the lowest on this in this case, will be the M9. The thickness of the blade definitely made those feathers, really thick when I was shaving off that wood, which would be harder to light well, to get lit well when you're making a fire, which is what we're doing here with the feather stick, is making thin pieces of tinder for a fire. Next, for a scale of 2, I'd say the Marine Corps 3S. That's just because the edge starts all the way down here after serrations, and that just makes it a little harder to control. Over a longer period with a harder wood, it might make it a lot harder to feather. We're using, I think this is old aspen or poplar tree that fell over here. So it's nothing too hard, but like if you hit oak, something like that, it might make it a lot harder. Next, I would say would be on a scale of, what was that, 3 I'm at, the Tops Moccasin Ranger. Did pretty good. I think I liked how it did. The curve of the blade helped me out, but it could have been a little thinner. Amazon Special did pretty good. Actually, I'm gonna switch these two. Give this one the 3, give this one the 4. Just because while this did a okay job, this did about as good a job, but a little better and a little easier to feather. In the top, I think that M7 bayonet did a pretty dang good job. A little thicker than I'd like, but overall did a really good job. Plenty of blade to use, even though it's a whole straight edge. But I think this gets the 5, but it's pretty close between these two. So that's those ones. Let's move on to the next test. All right, so our next test is chopping. We're gonna see how well we can chop a log down, a fallen tree, and get it to a more manageable size to be able to make fire with it so we can split it or make shelter with. So we're just gonna do some chopping. I'm gonna give 20 chops with each knife and bayonet and see how well it does. So starting over here with the M7, let's see what we do. All right, so that was 20. I don't know if I mentioned, this wood is a little wet, so take that as you will, and it's ant filled. So wouldn't be the greatest wood to work with, but there's 20 strikes, did okay. Let's move to the next one, which is the M9 bayonet. All right, a little better. Made a little bit bigger of a divot there with it. Next will be the Marine Corps 3S. All right, not too bad. Moving on to the Tops Moccasin Ranger. Okay, not terrible, not as good as I was hoping. All right, last but not least, the Amazon Special. Okay, not too bad. So let's grade these things out. All right, so my worst, I would say, was the M7. It's just not a good size for chopping. It did okay, but I'll say on scale 1, that's my worst one. Next, let's see. Probably, even though it did an okay job, the Amazon Special, I just don't like how it felt in my hand when it was coming down and chopping. It's a thin knife. It did okay. It got stuck a few times, but I don't have a lot of confidence in this knife over a long period of time. So even though it did an okay job, I'm gonna give it a 2 just because of how it felt in the hand. This was nice. I will say, I have one more comment on the chopping at the end of it I'll go over though. Next, let's see, Moccasin Ranger did okay right here, but I'll say as far as compared to the other ones that we have left, it didn't do quite as good of a job. And then we have the M9 bayonet at a 4, and the Marine Corps bayonet at a 5. This one did really good. This one didn't do too bad either. I will say something about all the bayonets that these have built in that these don't is when you're gripping it and you're coming down, that angle on the blade down here, or the butt of it, helps it stay in your hand. So on the bayonets, we don't have that. And when I was chopping, I kept catching all the bayonets on the end, on the mount here, where it's gonna feed into the bayonet lug on the rifle itself. So I was catching on those lugs, which I don't think it's gonna break the lugs, but it's gonna rough your hands up for sure. So that's those. Let's move on to the next test. So the next test we're gonna do is splitting wood with these knives and bayonets. This is just to show if we can take larger sections of wood that we've chopped with a saw or even cut up wood and chopped with our knife into more manageable pieces for fire and other things we might need to use it for. So I'm gonna take this piece of wood and a baton. So this is partially a durability test, just to see how well I can split it. First one we're gonna do is the M7. All right, so the next one we're gonna do is the M9 bayonet. All right, so pretty good. Say it went down a little faster than the M7. Next one, Marine Corps 3S. See how well it does. Pretty good, no complaints there. Next one we're gonna do is the Tops Moccasin Ranger. All right, that went pretty good. And our last one will be Amazon Special. Got a little piece of wood for it here. That went pretty good. All right, to grade these things out, I think in last place, the score of 1 will be the M9 bayonet. It did okay, had some trouble getting it started, but once it got started, it did a pretty good job. Next, I would say, was the M7 bayonet. It did a pretty good job. It's not a very thick, knife blade, knife edge bayonet, but it did split down pretty quickly once it got started. Next, for a scale of, or a grade of 3, the Marine Corps 3S, that did okay. Again, I had to start pretty far out, just like with feathering and with chopping, because that knife edge starts so far out, but it still grabbed pretty well. I have done this where the serrations were on the log, and fighting through the serrations can be a bit of a pain, so I did start pretty far out on it, but worked out overall. All right, next, and a kind of a tie for that 3 spot, but I'm putting it at 4, is the Amazon Special. It did a good job. These big old fake saw serrations that aren't gonna do a thing for you. Definitely, I feel like if I did a lot of heavy splitting with this, those would just break off. That log we used on this one was pretty small, so maybe it got an advantage, but it did okay. I think these are tied though at the end of the day. And then Moccasin Ranger, got a 5. Definitely did the best. Once this thing gets in there, it splits everything real well. It has a bit of a wedge shape to it at the end of the day. So once it gets in there, once you start driving it down, that thing splits. Super easy. So let's move to the last test. All right, so for our final test is gonna be how well does it throw sparks off a ferro rod? Because if it's a bushcraft survival knife, you want it to be able to make fire for you. So it's gonna see how well does it strike off a good ferro rod. So hopefully you have one of these with you so you can make some sparks to make fire. So first off, M7 bayonet off this thing. See how it goes. Not too bad. Let's go to the next one. M9 bayonet. Barely any effort too. Pretty good. Let's go to the next one. Marine Corps 3S. Find a good spot. Not too bad either. The Tops Moccasin Ranger. Hopefully we can find a good spot. There we go. Struggled a little bit. We'll go over that in the final part. And then the Amazon special. Okay, there's that. So let's see how all these did on a scale of 1 to 5. So first, or let's see, the worst was definitely Moccasin Ranger. It's just, for some reason, there's no good edge, even with the coating, working out of the coating on top of it. Just does not have a good edge to hit and scrape some metal off to make some sparks. Next, I'd say, was Amazon Special. Again, those, just like with splitting, these big old fake saw serrations kind of get in the way of really good spots, and I'm actually scratching a significant portion of the metal off when I create these sparks with the ferro rod. So that's something to be aware of, is you're definitely gonna wear out the top edge of this blade real fast. Next, say the M7 bayonet. Did all right, nothing spectacular. Marine Corps 3S for a 4, did okay, threw some good sparks. And then in top spot, definitely be the M9 bayonet. It just throws some crazy sparks. I think a lot of that comes down to on this top edge right here with the sheath. It's actually a wire cutting edge. So it's a pretty good edge right there to strike on the ferro rod. And it's also uncoated, which helps significantly. You just bare metal striking on the ferro rod, and it does a pretty good job. So there are those. Let's close this video out. All right, so now we've seen if a bayonet can work as a survival knife. And that was a pretty fun test. And at the end of the day, you know, when guys get issued these kind of knives for their rifles, it's a bayonet, it's for poking. But, you know, at the end of the day also, it's for survival, combat, utility tasks. So we got to see whether or not they're capable of doing all those tasks, which you might need to do if you're out in the wild in a military setting and you don't have something like an axe or a saw. Can it do those finer tasks? Can you chop, break up wood? Can you make fire? Everything like that. And they do. They do a pretty good job. So that was that. Leave a comment below what you thought your winner was, whether or not you would take one of those out there with you as a survival knife, and, you know, just your opinions on this video. But appreciate you watching. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.